Welcome to this podcast episode on vaccine safety. I'm Dr. Kevin Winthrop, a professor of infectious diseases and epidemiology here at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon. We have several vaccine constructs in play. The two mRNA vaccines, of course, in widespread use are from Pfizer and from Moderna. There's very little distinguishing them in terms of their efficacy and safety profile. I will highlight a couple aspects of the mRNA vaccine unique safety profile. The other vaccines in play in the US are really just one, the adenoviral vaccine made by Janssen or Johnson & Johnson. Of course, in Europe, there's also been the AstraZeneca vaccine as well. And that is another adenoviral vaccine, and that has had somewhat of a unique safety profile as well, similar to what we've seen with Janssen's adenoviral vaccine here. The vaccine yet to come is Novavax's vaccine. This is more of a traditional protein conjugated vaccine. The safety profile looked good in phase 3 trials. So most of what we know, particularly in the US, is the safety associated with mRNA vaccines. Most of the efficacy data and the safety data collected shows them to be very similar in both regards. I will say that initially the Pfizer, particularly the Pfizer vaccine, came out requiring this, very cold storage requirements, negative 70-degree freezers. Much of that went away eventually as new data came forward showing that the vaccine was more stable under less cold conditions. And I think at this point, there's really no issues with storage and handling between these vaccines that are precluding their use in certain situations in the US. I would like to say that these vaccines may be the safest vaccines we have ever seen. They have been administered to hundreds of millions of people in North America and throughout the world with very, very few serious safety sequelae. There are some very rare side effects that I will talk about, but by and large, the story with these vaccines is the benefit risk ratio in terms of when we talk about safety, really what we're talking about is benefit risk. How much benefit can you expect to receive from the vaccine and what is your risk of taking it? The benefits are huge, and we're witnessing that with the Delta surge, which is largely a pandemic among the unvaccinated. And there's numerous studies out in the last few weeks that if you're vaccinated, your risk of being hospitalized or dying due to COVID is many fold less than if you're unvaccinated. So that being said, I will start by that statement. The benefit risk ratio is huge. And on the benefit side, it's obviously very huge. On the risk side, the safety side, we see very few adverse events that are worth mentioning, to be honest. The biggest issue here has been reactogenicity. And clearly, some patients will have vaccine-associated reactogenicity. And this has been well captured in the phase 3 trial results. It's self-limited, it's manageable. I reassure my patients, this is not a reason not to get the vaccine. Now, what can you expect? Well, more reactogenicity on the second dose versus the first. We might see even more on the third dose now that people are getting boosters. That's an open question. But on the second dose, what do we see? About 30% of people having some fatigue, for example, as compared to maybe half of that in the placebo arms in the phase 3 trials. Others, local side effects, headache, chills, myalgias, joint pains. Again, a quarter to 40% of people might experience those type of reactions. They typically last less than 24 hours or even maybe slightly longer. They are self-limited. And again, they are more common in younger people, more common on the second dose. There are many patients who are 55 to 65 and older, and some don't have any reactogenicity. These are similar findings to what we see with other vaccines, particularly other vaccines with adjuvants. They're not markers of efficacy necessarily. Now, some patients with autoimmune disease, one concern has been, will it cause flare of an underlying autoimmune disease or inflammatory disease? And I can say at this point, we're not seeing that. We certainly see reports of some patients with rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, for example, who've had a flare after receiving a COVID vaccine. But in general, the early reports are not showing that these flares are really recurring more often in these patients than outside of the vaccine. Initial reports from Europe in the COVAX EULAR vaccine registry, for example, reported this summer over 1,500 patients with these type of inflammatory diseases were vaccinated. 31% had reactogenicity, probably similar or even less than what's been seen in the general population. I would hypothesize you probably see slightly less reacto in these patients because they're immune suppressed. But the flares post-vaccination were quite rare. It was only about 5%, which almost all occurred in the rheumatoid arthritis or underlying arthritis group. And most of these flares were arthritis. And that's about the percent we see just kind of in normal daily practice in those fields. So I'm not sure we're seeing really an increased risk of flare. And of course, if you do have a flare, it can be managed. So it's not, again, a reason not to receive the vaccine. Some of the more interesting other non-serious side effects that we've seen with the mRNA vaccine, Bell's palsy, that was seen in the phase 3 trials, and it's been seen in the post-marketing period. It's quite rare, but it occurs. We also see some signal with herpes zoster or shingles. I don't know why that is the case. I mean, certainly this vaccine doesn't cause shingles, but I do suspect there are patients with subclinical varicella reactivation in their skin, for example, and when they get an immune boost like this, that might help bring out that shingle so that it's very clinical or clinically apparent. So these things occur in less than 1% of patients. Of course, it's quite rare, but and they're self-limited, they're treatable, et cetera. But it's an interesting observation. We have seen flares of those types of illnesses. Some reports of uveitis flares. These are patients with inflammatory eye disease, again, similar to probably what I was just discussing in terms of the autoimmune disease population. But again, these are quite rare and they're manageable. In terms of even more rare would be anaphylaxis. That initially was a concern. Of course, it's a concern with anything. The reports for anaphylaxis are that they occur very rarely, in the order of a couple per million. There are recommendations to avoid the vaccine, of course, if you have known anaphylaxis to any of its constituents. And of course, when we give these vaccines, we are monitoring patients for 15 minutes afterwards in case of anaphylaxis. If that does occur, of course, it is also a manageable situation. So this is very rare, and I don't think there's anything unique there in terms of these vaccines. There are some things that are unique. They're not necessarily, again, reasons to avoid vaccines, but they might cause you to steer the vaccine to certain types of people or pick certain vaccines over the others. So one of the more interesting, albeit very rare, side effect is the coagulopathies associated with the adenoviral vaccines. In Europe, this was first seen with the AstraZeneca vaccine. Some real quick and dirty shoe leather epidemiology within a few weeks found that this was quite rare. It was occurring at a rate of perhaps 1 in 100,000, particularly in certain subgroups, and it was largely restricted to younger individuals, i.e. those under age 60, and much more common in those that were female. So in the US, we started to see reports of very rare central cerebral vein thromboses, primarily a coagulopathy that was then recognized to be associated with the J&J adenoviral vaccine here in the US. And again, very rare, but also seemingly restricted largely to those who were female and those who were younger of age. And the risk was, probably slightly less than that seen with AZ, maybe 1 in a million, at least with the initial reports. So these are very rare events. And perhaps, if you were younger and female, that might be a reason to avoid this vaccine and go to the mRNA vaccine. But, I should say that in Europe, they managed this risk by doing just that. In France, for example, they started restricting the AZ vaccine there to individuals who are older than age 55, where they just didn't see this complication. So again, very rare, very interesting. I don't know that anyone knows the pathophysiology behind this in terms of why an adenoviral vaccine could do this and why it disproportionately affects younger females. But suffice to say, it's still quite rare, even in that higher risk group. We have not seen the coagulopathy that was reported with the adenoviral vaccines, very rarely. With the mRNA vaccines, probably the biggest story has been with the myocarditis and pericarditis that we've seen. that is, on the converse, has been more of a younger male issue. It's been slightly more common with the Moderna vaccine as compared to the Pfizer vaccine. This data was most recently reviewed at the ACIP meeting August 30th. So the data was most recently summarized from various data sources. There's VAERS, there's VSD, there's the post-marketing data from the companies. You again see something similar to what we've seen all along, is that both mRNA doses are associated with a several-fold increase in myocarditis, pericarditis. Almost all these cases are occurring in younger people. However, the excess number of cases in those age groups it's very rare. When you look at both mRNA vaccine doses together, we're talking about 15 excess cases per million doses. So it's quite a rare event. And again, the risk is higher for Moderna as compared to Pfizer. It was roughly 19.8 excess cases per million after Moderna dose 2, for example, as compared to 13.6 cases per million after dose 2 of the Pfizer vaccine. And the average, of course, was right in the middle. It was about 15.5 per million. So again, quite rare. These were cases that occurred within the 21 days after vaccination among 12 to 39-year-olds where the data was collected. The initial report that the MMWR put out, I think it was 323 cases and 296 million doses given. So mostly young males, again, and almost all self-limited. Very few of these events results in hospitalization or anything more severe than that. So again, it's not a reason to avoid this vaccine, even among young males. There has been benefit risk calculations made and numbers needed to treat calculations made, and CDC has done a good job of showing that data and putting that out. The risk of having myocarditis and pericarditis due to COVID is higher than that due to the vaccine for, say, a 20-year-old male, for example. So it's still worth getting vaccinated. The risk is extraordinarily low. And again, the risk-benefit ratio is in the favor of vaccination. Both FDA and ACIP both recently met to review available data, and an EUA was extended to booster doses, and then ACIP, of course, followed up with that in terms of recommendations. But now anyone age 18 or older with any high-risk condition or high risk of exposure who's had a initial Pfizer or Moderna vaccine series, if that was completed greater than 6 months ago, they're now eligible and recommended to receive a booster. In terms of the adenoviral construct, the Janssen or Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that was also given the go-ahead in terms of recommendation for at least a single booster in patients who've completed their initial one-shot vaccine series at least 2 months ago. So now basically everyone who's completed a series, who's at high risk of infection or has underlying comorbidities, et cetera, should be eligible for a booster. There are questions around the booster dose. We don't have a full vision of safety and efficacy of a booster yet. We have initial reports, particularly in immunosuppressed groups who've been given a booster. Some individuals respond to that favorably with antibody development, although a good proportion don't. They still remain with low titers or really non-measurable titers. It really depends on what their level of immunosuppression is and what kind of drugs they're on that are causing the immunosuppression or what conditions they have. In terms of the general population, we have seen some reports of safety and immunogenicity in the booster, a third dose in those who've had prior mRNA doses. We've also seen at least one study showing the possibility of boosting a prior adenoviral vaccine with an mRNA vaccine. So, someone who's received the Johnson & Johnson or the AZ vaccine one dose certainly could get boosted with the mRNA vaccine. There is a study showing that it was tolerated and very immunogenic. In fact, more immunogenic than boosting a prior adenoviral vaccine with another adenoviral vaccine. Now, both FDA and ACIP commented on a mix and match strategy. They are open to it. They recommended that it's okay. They're giving states and localities flexibility on mixing and matching. There is some data suggesting there might be benefit to mixing and matching, particularly mRNA vaccines after initial adenoviral vaccination. So, stay tuned. We'll have more data as things evolve here and what we know more about long-term effects of mixing and matching. But for now, it is okay to do and might have some benefits. In summary, when you look at vaccine safety, you're really talking about benefit risk, and probably there are no vaccines out there where the benefit risk ratio of receiving a vaccine comes anywhere close to what we have today in the current COVID-19 pandemic. There's no question that the very, very rare serious side effects associated with these vaccines are far outweighed by the benefits and efficacy and disease prevention aspects of these vaccines. So while I think these adverse events are interesting, and in some cases they might steer you to choose one vaccine over the other, those cases are very rare. Aside from those rare events, we're really talking about reactogenicity, being a daily headache or joint ache or not feeling well after your vaccine, particularly your booster vaccine. Those reactions may be more intense, particularly now with the second booster, if we're moving into that third exposure category where we seem to be headed with these vaccines and with mRNA vaccines, and rather a second or a first booster really with the adenoviral vaccine. But again, these are not reasons to not get vaccines. I don't see a reason to avoid vaccination at this point for pretty much 99.99% of individuals. So go out and get vaccinated and help put an end to this pandemic.